Today on Ag News Daily.
And so air quality is always on the front of mind, I think, when you're talking about diesel and you're talking about emissions. And so biodiesel, we know, burns a lot cleaner and reduces particulate matter. And so that's why it's really important for Chicagoans to understand that you don't have to breathe dirty air. You can just switch your fuel and have cleaner air. So that's a lot of the conversations in Chicago are happening around that.
We want to increase trade, but we want it to be fair trade. We have people who both are really dependent on exports and other people who are really concerned about a lot of imports that might depress prices. So we have to look at both of these.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. My name is Tanner.
My name's Delaney Howell. We're thankful you guys are joining us for another week. Tanner, today's National Donut Day. I wanted to share that with you.
Do you see what's just outside of the frame?
Didn't notice that. I'm glad you're celebrating.
I am. Who wouldn't want to celebrate National Donut Day? Who also is ready for good weather? A front moved through the Midwest earlier this week that brought some scattered showers and storms, but then stalled out over the South in the middle of the week. The heavy rainfall caused significant flooding in parts of Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. Another system arrived late in the week, continuing this active weather pattern that is expected now through the middle of June. While not all areas will see heavy rain, many crops like wheat, corn, and soybeans will benefit from this moisture. The northern plains remained mostly dry with only light showers early on this week. A weekend system, though, may bring some eastern areas rain, but that drought condition persists despite slight improvement. Mild temps are expected through next week as well. Meteorologist Eric Snodgrass says that there's no clear sign of a hot, dry Midwest summer yet, but a shift could come after mid-June. Changes in large-scale atmospheric patterns later this month will influence heat risk, storm chances, and drought potential across most of the U.S.
Well, nonetheless, Tanner, we continue to see crop conditions reported this week and still seeing good crop conditions overall for corn, winter wheat, and spring wheat, as well as our first growing season update here for soybeans as well. As of Sunday, 69% of the U.S. corn crop is rated good to excellent, up 1 percentage point from the previous week. 93% of the crop in the ground and 78% emerged, close to the 5-year averages. Some areas are still facing challenges, especially in the east, but conditions are holding steady while soybeans received their first rating with 67% good to excellent, planting at 84%. 63% of that crop is slightly emerged, pacing slightly behind last year. And winter wheat stands at 52% good to excellent, up 2% from last week. As we look at spring wheat ratings, those have improved slightly, about 5% now to 50% good to excellent, with 95% planted and 73% emerged. Warm and dry weather has certainly aided in planting emergence, and we're going to continue to hopefully see some late season moisture here, Tanner, to add into the growing season.
That's right. And we may soon see a breakthrough on the U.S.-India trade talks. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says these two countries are close to finalizing a deal that expand the market access for American agriculture. Speaking Monday at the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, Lutnick remained optimistic. He said in a statement, "You should expect a deal between the United States and India in the not-too-distant future." He included that agriculture is likely to be a part of the agreement, but stressed it needs to be fair for both sides. Market analyst Jim McCormick with agmarket.net says those negotiations won't be easy, noting that greater U.S. access could create political pressure in India. McCormick also said the more products that we sell to the Indian market, the more competition for Indian farmers. So their leaders are going to get pushback, just like ours do. Lutnick didn't offer any details on what the deal might include, but a U.S. trade delegation is heading to New Delhi soon. So maybe some good news, or at least some news, coming shortly.
We're going to talk more about trade agreements coming up here soon, but we've got to talk tariffs first. Steel and aluminum prices surged this week after President Trump announced plans to double tariffs on imports of both metals from 25 to 50% late last week after we recorded the show. The new tariffs took effect on June 4th this week. The news sent shares of foreign steelmakers sharply lower as investors braced for a potential drop in U.S. demand. The U.S. imports more than 26 million tons of steel annually and accounts for roughly 20% of Europe's steel exports, making it a key global buyer. Analysts warn the tariff hike could disrupt industries that rely on imported steel and aluminum, and some experts believe the move may be a negotiating tactic designed to strengthen President Trump's administration hand in trade talks with the European Union and other partners. Tanner, before we get into some other trade headlines, though, earlier this week, Ag News Daily reporter and producer Michelle Stangler attended a media tour organized by the Clean Fuels Alliance America. Soybean growers are increasingly investing in the biodiesel market, but the industry faces uncertainty as it awaits updates from the EPA on the Renewable Fuel Standard. First, we'll dive into the topic with an industry consultant. Let's jump to that interview now.
Well, we're in a bit of an untraditional area here in Chicago, learning all about the biodiesel industry with Pete Probst. Pete, tell me a little bit about your role and connection to the biodiesel industry.
Sure. So my name Pete Probst. I work with Indigenous Energy, is my consulting company. We basically work with a range of different stakeholders, but mainly we work with soybean associations, state-level soybean associations. We also help run the Chicago Park District Biodiesel Program. We've been doing this since 2012.
Wow. So that's what brought me here today. We were just riding a ship that was powered by biodiesel. Tell me about what we were riding.
Yeah, so that ship is running on a B17 blend. It may sound like an unusual blend, but that's because there's a state-level tax incentive in Illinois. So there's no state sales tax for blends of 16 and above currently. Next year, in April 1st, that's going to increase to a B19. So it'll basically be at a B20. And so that's why currently they're at B17 is because it's cheaper.
And tell me about B17. What is it?
B17 is 17% biodiesel. And so, biodiesel is something you can blend with any proportion really with petroleum diesel. Typically, most fleets will top out at a 20% blend, but you can't go beyond it. There's really no reason why you can't. It's just a matter of, familiarity and comfort level with the fleet operators or the equipment operators.
Now, you talk with a lot of people, I assume, about the biodiesel industry. Tell me about first some of those opportunities for the industry here in the year ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess just in general, as a consumer base, there's still we see a lot of work that can still be done just educating fleet owners or truck drivers or anybody, just because biodiesel's had a long track record. And in the early days of biodiesel, there has been some fuel quality issues. But in terms of education, we always like to tell them, the fuel quality specifications that are required for current day biodiesel have been continuously evolving. And so the biodiesel that you're going to find today out in the retail marketplace is different from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. So that's kind of the first step. There's a lot of demand that can grow just by educating people, we feel, but especially in Illinois because it's cheaper. Most people don't really even care about any of that. They just look at the pump and they see a cheap price. So, yeah. So I guess in terms of the price, some of the work that's being done at different state levels is to come up with different incentives. So there's no state sales tax in Illinois. There's other benefits in Iowa, state level incentives. Missouri has some. Michigan's working on a bill right now. Indiana is working on a bill. So a lot of these little state level incentives really do go a long way towards bringing the cost level down and making it more available for the wider consumer base.
Now, you work in a few different states. Is it unique in Illinois where it's a bit cheaper, biodiesel? Biodiesel
in Illinois has definitely got the strongest incentive. So it's basically 6.25% reduction. Other states are looking at maybe a 5 cent per gallon or 10 cent per gallon, depending on the blend level. And so Illinois has been really a leader in this space. And that incentive started in 2003. It's really driven the industry in Illinois, which is at a good spot because we make the most soybeans in Illinois out of any other state. And so it kind of makes sense that, we've also got the biodiesel production here and they have the consumption as well.
Now, talk to me about some of the challenges that the industry faces, maybe quite a bit of uncertainty.
Yeah, so there's a lot of uncertainty. There's different tax credits that are basically part of RFS where, there's the biodiesel blenders tax credit is also gone. And so there's a transition now towards a different type of incentive, basically framework from the federal government. And so that's still kind of up in the air in some cases in terms of what are the, instead of having for the biodiesel tax credit, for instance, it used to be $1 per gallon. But now that's changing based on the feedstock and based on the carbon, carbon reductions available with those feedstocks. And so that's where there's a lot of science that comes into play. There's a lot of models that are out there, and depending on which model you look at, it could be a different type of carbon footprint. And so that's where I think a lot of the uncertainty is, especially for these biodiesel producers that are sort of used to having the $1 per gallon tax credit, or distributors, and now it's changing. And so that's really where a lot of the uncertainty is.
So talk to me about some of those conversations you're having today, these past few weeks with those people who are making biodiesel.
Yeah, so my role, I actually don't talk to that many people, so I'm not the expert on that. I mean, I have to follow it, obviously, but I'm not really sure on a week-to-week basis what's happening, to be honest with you.
So what does your role look like then these past few weeks?
Yeah, basically just more or less, talking to fleets, working any kind of avenue to get the word out more. So we do a lot of like literature, we do like one-pagers, and just any kind of thing that we can put out there to make people understand the benefits of biodiesel so they can make the decisions for themselves if it's something that they want to do.
Is there one area you're really focusing in because there is a huge concern and you keep getting the question asked re-over and re-over?
Well, I think a lot of times, we're in Chicago today. And so, Chicago is an area that has the second highest asthma rates in the country. And so air quality is always on the front of mind, I think, when you're talking about diesel and you're talking about emissions. And so biodiesel, we know, burns a lot cleaner and reduces particulate matter. And so that's why it's really important for Chicagoans to understand that you don't have to breathe dirty air. You can just switch your fuel and have cleaner air. So that's a lot of the conversations in Chicago are happening around that.
And here, when you're talking about the Chicago Parks District, talk to me about some of those conversations that you had that really were solving them a problem.
Yeah, so initially the way this program started was that they just wanted to do biodiesel, but they didn't really know how to do it. And so that's where this project went out to bid for a company. And so, I put together a proposal and came in and basically started running the program. And so we've gone through a lot of different sort of iterations of, different blends and working with cold weather and sort of learning as we go. But at the end of the day, we've had no really issues with any trucks or vehicles going down, and program's been a success.
Why do you think that the Chicago Parks District really wanted to look into biodiesel?
They understood early on that biodiesel is a good fit for them because they can run it in their vehicles. If they got a lot of diesel vehicles pre-existing, they didn't want to have to go out and buy new vehicles like new electric and infrastructure. And so biodiesel is a really good drop-in fuel replacement for petroleum without a lot of costs. You basically just, if there is a difference in cost, it might only be a couple pennies per gallon on average. And so really the threshold's pretty low in terms of economic, investment. You can just start doing it. It's just as easy as calling your fuel supplier and saying, I want biodiesel blends. And then because we're in Illinois where there's so much biodiesel, it's actually pretty easy to do.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pete. You're sharing a little more about the industry and direct hands-on to some of those consumers that are using biodiesel. Continue to follow along to see some of the behind the scenes of biodiesel production on the next interview.
Well, stay tuned. Next week, we'll have another interview from a concerned processor of biodiesel due to some of that market uncertainty. Switching tracks here, the National Corn Growers Association is teaming up with the Farm Credit Council to launch a new mentorship program called On Deck. The initiative pairs experienced grower leaders with young and beginning farmers to help shape the next generation of agricultural leaders. Ann Thompson with the Farm Credit Council says the goal of it is to give young producers early exposure to the opportunities within the association. Mentees were nominated by NCGA's state partners and selected to participate in 3 months of hands-on programming with their mentors. This year's group includes 3 young farmers from Iowa and 1 from Michigan. NCGA leaders say On Deck is designed to help young producers overcome the challenges of starting out in a tough, demanding industry while building a stronger future for corn growers nationwide. So a cool, unique program there starting out, Tanner.
Another unique program, the USDA is leading a trade mission to Peru. The USDA is launching this major trade mission next week. We are aimed at expanding the market access and increasing U.S. ag exports. The trip runs from June 9th through June 12th and comes as the U.S. works to close a $3.66 billion agricultural trade deficit with Peru. The delegation includes more than 50 agribusinesses, trade organizations, and representatives from 5 state ag departments. Foreign Agriculture Safety Service Administrator Daniel Whiteley, who said this mission is for the USDA, focusing on creating more export opportunities for American farmers and ranchers and agribusinesses. Peru is currently the 4th largest market for U.S. ag products in South America, and the U.S. is Peru's 2nd largest ag supplier. Since 2009, two-way ag agreements between the countries have grown by 263%, reaching over $5 billion. Still, the trade imbalance remains. As part of the effort to close this gap, these U.S. delegates will take part in a business-to-business meeting with buyers from both Peru and Ecuador. So, exciting news there. Hopefully, good news comes from that visit.
Well, we got a big headline this week, actually here in the state of Iowa, as Vietnam delegates made their way here to the state, signing an MOU with several Midwest states, marking a major step forward for U.S. grain exports. Earlier this week, Iowa welcomed more than 50 members of a Vietnamese trade delegation to the state capital. The visit culminated in the signing of 5 trade agreements totaling $800 million. The deals, including 900,000 metric tons of corn and 250,000 metric tons of DDGs, destined for Vietnam's feed industry. A variety of representatives spoke at the event, including Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig, along with the Iowa Corn Promotion Board President Ralph Lentz. But one of those 5 trade deals included a partnership between Poet and Vietnam. Brandon Hansen, export manager for Southeast Asia with Poet, who was present at the event, said, Vietnam and Poet have enjoyed a good partnership since 2021, but the signing of this MOU will bring a new level of collaboration. Vietnam has promised to increase purchases of U.S. DDGs and U.S. soybean meal substantially from their 2024 baseline, and the estimated total value of these purchases will be $60 million. He also shared this will equate to about 100,000 metric tons of DDGs and 100,000 metric tons of soybean meal, or about 8,800 semi-trucks. He said this deal came together relatively quickly, only about 4 weeks in the making, and would not have been possible without that previous relationship. Vietnam also reportedly has been weighing a nationwide E10 ethanol mandate by 2025, which would require gasoline to contain, of course, 10% ethanol. If adopted, would create additional demand of 200 million gallons of ethanol, a major opportunity for Iowa's corn growers. So Iowa Corn, the U.S. Grains Council, and Vietnamese officials have been working on this deal for many years now. Tanner, I'd like to think that our Vietnamese trip that we took back in February with the Iowa Corn Growers Association maybe had a small piece to do with that MOU that was signed.
I knew you were going to bring that up. You probably did. Had a lot to deal with that. But the Center for Environment and Welfare has launched a new campaign urging Congress to address the nationwide impact of California's Prop 12. The group calls the law overreaching and says it is driving up grocery prices across the United States. Prop 12 bans the sale of most eggs and pork that don't meet strict animal welfare standards in California, only allowing higher-cost specialty products like free-range eggs and pasture-raised pork in their markets. The Food Price Fix campaign includes a website, an educational video, and a letter-writing effort encouraging voters to contact their lawmakers to support this federal solution. Will Coggin, the research director for the center, says consumers who have never been to California are paying the price for its inflationary law. Legislators must nullify Prop 12 and help bring down grocery costs for struggling American families. This campaign arrives amid growing concerns nationwide about food affordability, especially among low-income households. So we'll continue to see more, but I think a positive initiative pushing forward.
And as we know, pork is a staple diet in a lot of lower-income households, so makes sense there. They're focused on that initiative. Cattle producers across the Midwest have been seeing record high prices for their livestock. We're going to talk more about that in our markets section, but these profits comes with a rise in cattle theft, ironically enough. Livestock theft, or cattle rustling, is no longer just a thing of the Old West. Criminals are targeting unattended animals, especially those easy to access. Scarlett Mattinger, Vice President of Communications at the Kansas Livestock Association, warns that thieves see stealing cattle as an easy way to earn a dollar. She urges ranchers to secure pens and pastures with locks and chains to try and deter theft. Producers should avoid leaving cattle penned overnight, stay alert near high-traffic areas, frequently count their herds, and watch for suspicious vehicles. If animals go missing, Mattinger says to immediately contact the local sheriff's office and to broaden their search beyond state lines, especially near Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Colorado, since stolen cattle can be moved across state borders. To prevent theft, you should look to use permanent identification using brands or ear notches. Temporary tags can be removed, but branding can help quickly identify stolen animals at auctions. Tanner, as we take a look here at our interview for today, tariffs, of course, have been a hot topic over the past few months. At NAFB's Washington Watch, I caught up with David Salmonsen, who is the Director of Governmental Relations with the American Farm Bureau Federation, to talk tariffs, foreign affairs, and a little bit of ag policy. Let's roll into that interview now. Well, David, before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, let's chat just briefly about your background and how you found yourself at AFBF.
Sure. Well, I grew up on a dairy and vegetable farm in Onondaga County, New York, central New York, and went to college and majored in political science, history, all of that. Worked at our state legislature in Albany for a while. Came down to D.C., attended law school, went back to New York. Actually, I went back to New York State. I really wasn't intending to. I thought my career would wholly be in D.C., but like an awful lot of people, there was a farm accident with my father, and went back and pitched in, ran the farm for a while, reoriented myself in New York, became an attorney there, and ended up working back in Albany, working for the state of New York, Department of Agriculture for many years, assistant to the commissioner there, worked on all kinds of issues. And then found myself with an offer to come down almost 30 years ago now, join American Farm Bureau, and on a variety of issues here, whether it was agriculture directly, a lot of environmental issues. And for the last 20 plus years, I've concentrated on trade issues. So there's always going on plenty of things in the international world involving agriculture, hopefully working for the benefit of our members, our farmers and ranchers. And right now, with all of the actions the Trump administration is taking, trade is certainly one of the top issues and having a big impact currently and on the future for farmers, ranchers, and agricultural trade generally.
Well, perfect. You seem like the guy to talk to then about some of these issues as it relates to trade. David, we've got a lot of different trade topics, as you mentioned earlier. AFBF covers a myriad of different producers. You represent a large group of folks. How are you managing all of those different priorities?
Right. Well, we have a policy process, so our delegates come together, and all of our policy issues come from the grass ups through our counties and state up to the nation. And so they're broad. They're mostly fairly broad. We want to increase trade, but we want it to be fair trade. We have people who both are really dependent on exports and other people who are really concerned about a lot of imports that might depress prices. So we have to look at both of these, and it's done in different ways. When we're looking for trade agreements, we want other countries where we see there's an opportunity, but maybe we could do better if they had lower tariffs. Well, a lot of what President Trump's approach lately has been by saying, if you don't lower your tariffs, we'll raise the U.S. tariffs on your product because our tariffs have been lower for many, many decades probably. And those countries are coming to the table. They're coming to D.C. They're meeting with the administration. We've seen good-sized delegations and high-level people from Japan or Vietnam or South Korea, India, all other countries around the world. I think we're here in D.C. We're expecting a visit from the brand new Prime Minister, the elected Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Carney. We'll talk about the issues with U.S. and Canada, which there have been many lately, and tariffs involved in that. And of course, we also had a lot of visits from high-level officials from Mexico. And I know there was going to be a review scheduled for next year of the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement. But I know that President Trump wants to do that more quickly than that. And so I think those three countries are probably getting ready for something like that to happen this fall. So there's just a lot of issues as this administration is trying to lower barriers for all of our industries around the world so we can export more, including agriculture. So we see an opportunity here to make sure that these negotiations include not just the tariffs, which of course are very important, but also all the non-tariff barriers, some of which we've been dealing with for decades and decades. You think of all the standards, we think non-scientific standards that the European Union has that really hold up our meat exports. Other countries around the world have those same kind of standards. Other countries have licensing agreements, a lot of bureaucracy meant to protect a product and really don't give us a fair stake. So we're hoping and working with the administration to make sure these issues are also brought up. While you've got all these countries to the table, let's see if we can get the best deal from them, for us, and a deal that works for them too. I mean, we want trade to grow, to go forward. We've had such a long history of growth in ag trade. When I started working on these issues in the early 2000s, the U.S. exported right around $40 billion of ag a year. Just a few years ago, we got up over $200 billion every year. And now we've fallen back. We're in the mid-170s, mostly due to lower commodity prices, as we all know. But not because of volume. We're still basically exporting the volume with a growth in volume. The world wants our products, but prices fluctuate. The challenge we have, which I think will, depending on how long this goes, will have a depressing impact on some of our exports, are these very high tariffs with China. The President Trump put on 145% added tariff for Chinese products coming to the U.S. They retaliate with 125%. So in a sense, you could say there's really not a lot of trade in products back and forth between U.S. and China right now. We hope that this will get resolved sooner rather than later. The tariffs will come down and that the normal business can resume. But that depends on a few people making very high-level decisions.
So, again, I feel like I can ask you this. You're an expert, I would say, spending 20 years of your career in trade and policy specifically here. What do you think is some of the rhetoric behind the tariffs that have been put in place this administration versus Trump 1.0, let's say?
Oh, I think they came out with a much broader approach. In the first term, nothing really started happening till the second year in 2018. And it was some of the same things. Steel and aluminum tariffs, those were put on almost exactly 7 years ago, at the same time they were put on now. But they were resolved mostly after a few months. Other countries agreed to limit their exports, and the tariffs went away. Their retaliation on our products primarily went away. That was taken care of fairly quickly. What stayed were the tariffs that the president originally put on China, some of which are still in place. And that took about a year and a half or so to negotiate that away. And that resulted in that U.S.-China Phase 1 agreement that was signed early in 2020. So that took a while to resolve itself. This time, it's a much broader concept. The president's trying to deal with the whole world, has put a 10% import tariff on goods from almost all the countries around the world, higher tariffs on a select group of countries, those that we have the biggest trade deficit with. And those are the countries that have really stepped up to the plate initially to have these negotiations. I mean, Vietnam, there's like a 45 or 6% tariff. Japan, South Korea in the mid-20s. Well, we do so much business with them, they don't want to have those kind of tariffs that will price them out of the U.S. marketplace, so they're willing to come and make deals. And that is what's going on now. I mean, the administration has taken on an awful lot of work. The people at our trade representative's office, which is not a big agency, supported or led in some places by people at the Department of Commerce. The Treasury Office is heavily involved in this, and with backup from all the other agencies. I know, of course, the people at the Department of Agriculture are supporting the ag folks that work at USTR. So it is just a bigger approach altogether. And I think behind it, the plan was from the president, first, he wanted countries to react. So that they had to come and deal because they were afraid of these tariffs and pricing themselves out of the U.S., the biggest consumer market in the world. So he wanted to react. And I think the thought also is, in a sense, he wants them to compete with each other. Who can make a deal? Who can make the best deal? So one of the many interesting things to watch as this goes on is who goes first? What country makes the deal first?
Do you have a speculation?
I'm not really sure who wants to do that. I would think a country where things may be fairly simple, But whoever announces the first deal, an awful lot of countries will say, oh, that's the deal. And maybe they'll go with it. Some countries far more complicated. You think of the European Union countries, India. They're talking about basically a framework of how we talk. But it's a big, complicated country. A lot of opportunity there in the future, but it's been very difficult to deal with in the past. So that's going to take longer. But we're starting, the president has started and is getting reaction on a process that really can, first you have the disruption, and then you have the result and how new relationships will happen. So this is all going on right now. A lot of opportunity here.
From AFBF's position, what do you think are the potential areas of concern, maybe some watch out areas, and also areas for opportunity within these trade negotiations?
Right. Well, I think the first one of concern, of course, for everybody in ag and with us is China. Because again, what's been done so far is pretty much giving China trade almost to a halt, or it will over time. It's been such a huge market for us, was our largest export market for so long. It's fell back a little bit the last few years, but still last year I think we sold over 24 billion. Still our largest export market for soybeans. It was our largest export market for cotton for so long. Now Brazil, I think, is selling a little more to them. So we've got a real competitor in South America, specifically Brazil. Some Argentinian product goes there. So we have to watch out for that too. We'd hate to, in the context of everything that's going on, lose that market. I think we know it's not going to be what it was. I can reflect back on just a few years ago, people from experts here in town talking about the future of trade and predicting that, agricultural trade with China by now, 2025 and on, we could be upwards of $50 billion a year. Well, we're going to be in the mid or low 20s. The way the world has turned, it just hasn't worked out that way. But China still is the world's biggest buyer of food and ag products. Even they import more food and ag than we do. And everybody wants a piece of that market. Well, we may have to find other avenues. That's why we're strongly supportive of the export promotion programs USDA runs. We want to see these negotiations rely on lowering barriers with other countries that are growing. Again, we look at India, we look at other countries. Some longstanding barriers we've had in Europe, we could sell more there. So I think we're going to have to play on a lot of different fronts with a lot of different countries. We've always been willing to, but in the past we had the growth of China to just take so much product, and they became so important. Well, at least for now, that world has changed. So we'll be working around the world along with our partners and everybody else who works in this area to try to do more for U.S. ag exports.
David, I know you're the trade guy,
Yeah.
not the policy guy, but I'm going to ask a little bit of a policy-related question here. So looking at the reconciliation, where that's at right now in Congress, what's the path forward?
Well, yes. They have that process, which they're working away. And as the approach so far has been, one bill, dealing with the budget, dealing with taxes. Who knows? There's discussion. Maybe there could be some elements from the farm bill, some parts that there's talk, maybe including that. I don't know where that stands. But Congress doesn't pass a lot of bills, and they're looking with these tight majorities, and at least they don't anymore, with you've only got a 3 or 4 vote majority in the House, 3 vote majority in the Senate, trying to do what they can to get this process through. Do the budget for the government, deal with the requests from the president for cuts in government, trying to maintain programs with fewer people, trying to get rid of some programs they think aren't important anymore, and trying to set the stage also to include taxes, dealing with tax issues. So there's a lot going on right now. And, you can, as difficult as it is on the administration side, but now you've got to deal with 535 members of Congress, all of whom are hearing from constituents wanting things. I always reflect back when in my early days is when I was in Albany, lobbying the New York State Legislature. And I sat down in front of a state assemblyman and was talking about making some cuts. I was with New York Farm Bureau then, And of course, farmers care at the state level, like anything, about the level of taxes. And if you could lower the costs of government, less pressure on taxes. And he heard me out very well. He was representing a rural area. And he said, young man, think I remember this because that's when people used to say young man to me. This was 40 years ago. And he said, David, I agree with everything you say. But just remember and understand, the next 100 people that sit in that chair opposite my desk are all going to be asking for more. And I think that was the best political science lesson I ever had.
Managing a lot of different voices.
Yes, they have a lot of constituents, state level, our Congress, for hearing from all kinds of people wanting all kinds of things. And they're usually looking to come to Congress to achieve a goal. And there's a lot of pressure to spend more. So trying to do cuts, to rationalize things, have government focus on what's most important, at least to the people in power now, is always difficult. And working with the Congress, hearing all these voices is difficult. So this process will take the time it takes. As always, we want to get it done, but there's a lot of work to do.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time.
You bet.
Your expert insight into some of the trade and policy.
Happy to visit with you.
Appreciate you doing that interview, Delaney. Taking a look now for a quick update from Josh Linville in the latest fertilizer media update. He says India announced 1.5 million tons of urea tender for shipment by July 31st, which offers due next Thursday. The market responded slightly bullish, but now waits on bids. China remains that wild card, expected to export just 2 million tons this year, well below their normal 5 to 5.5 million. Rising domestic prices could lead China to halt their exports. Europe is moving, though, to block Russian fertilizer, aiming to limit war funding, but this could raise costs for European farmers due to less efficient trade routes. Here in the U.S., summer urea prices are projected to be about 20% higher than last year. UAN supply is improving, but prices remain high due to earlier tight inventories and those weather delays. Taking a look at phosphate, Linville says the global supply is tight. China is limiting their exports to around 4 million tons, less than half of normal, and India continues to buy steadily, which is keeping those prices higher. Here in the U.S., production is at record lows, and trade restrictions on major suppliers are still in place. No price relief is expected this summer. The corn-to-DAP ratio is near record highs, making phosphate especially costly this year for farmers. So you didn't give me a lot of good news to share.
Well, taking a look at the mainstream markets this week, late in the week, President Trump reportedly had a productive conversation with President Xi about a potential trade deal. Although details from that phone call were sparse, that news was enough to provide optimism to Wall Street, which pushed many stocks higher on the week. Crude oil this week pushed toward $64 a barrel, a ceiling that has been set here over the past 2 months. And as we take a look at grains this week, export sales proved to be a little bit of a snoozer, coming in line with trade expectations. But we got some Black Sea news for you this week, Tanner, as wheat saw some support. As we saw that news coming out of the Black Sea region, Ukraine made a couple of large strikes on Russia last weekend, heading into this week, which has escalated the situation. President Trump posted on his Truth Social account that he and Putin had a conversation this week about the attacks, looking to strike a peace deal. And while the president stated on his account it was a good call, it did not lead to any immediate plans for peace. And in fact, Putin said he was planning his retaliatory attack as they spoke. So wheat got some fresh news there. Corn and soybeans, meanwhile, continue to digest the latest weather headlines in particular and biofuel headlines. October live cattle continue to push to fresh highs, gapping open higher on Thursday before ending the day well above 213. August feeder cattle also put in fresh highs on Thursday, just under 309. So continuing to see the engine still moving ahead there in the cattle complex.
There's been some reports of local sale barns and some sale barns out in the Dakotas seeing very high feeder cattle prices.
No doubt.
When it comes to auctions there. But we like reports like that. Keep sending us those messages. Keeping our pulse on agriculture is important for the messages that we provide you. So send those in. Make sure if you haven't checked us out on YouTube, you go over there and you hit subscribe. We would greatly appreciate that.
And follow us on all of the social media sites. You can find us at Ag News Daily. But Tanner, with that, what do you say we wish everybody a happy National Donut Day and send everybody on their way?
All right, let's do it.